authentic genius and live the life you desire.
You are now listening to
Join Dr. Rademaker for an enlightened conversation about our brain intelligence, our body intelligence, and our energy intelligence. And now, here's your host, Dr. Bart Rademaker.
Well, I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, prescription for your transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success. And today, talking to an amazing person, Rebecca, and in the background, my producer, Robin, who doesn't have a camera these days, and so just have to imagine how beautiful and wonderful she is. And what today is all about, what my platform is always about, it's bringing you new insights that actually could totally revolutionize and transform your life. And the challenge that we always have is that sometimes we're just a little tentative, or should I say freaked out about what it is that we need to find out about ourselves, our life, and how we're showing up. Sometimes we're just too scared to ask the questions. And oftentimes it just holds us back from living that life to the fullest. And it doesn't matter what it's all about. I mean, today is a particular area that most people freak out, but it could be anything. And so that's why this platform is so critical, because my mission is to interview all these amazing thought leaders out there and just have them share their gems, their insights, their talents with you, so that you can then transform your life. And so for today, it's all about having that joyful relationship with your body. So imagine what that is. And so Rebecca, I'm so glad to be talking to you today, because truly this is an area that I haven't really talked about much, and it is a critical part of our lives. It's that relationship with our body. So thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, Bart. Thanks for having me on.
So give us a little perspective of what is that in essentially, or what, no, let's rephrase, let's frame it properly. And let's just go ahead and figure out, okay, what is the problem? Where does this problem come from, where we're not recognizing that need for that relationship for our body, because it shows up in so many different ways? Where does that come from?
Well, I think it starts really early on from the messages that we get when we are children that our body is private. We have private parts, and we're not supposed to touch them, and we're not supposed to touch other people's. And there's a subtle message that just gets handed down over and over again that we're better off without bodies. Really, we're supposed to be our achievements, we're supposed to be our minds, and this body is just something that's kind of along for the ride. And some people they may say that they have a joyful relationship to their body in terms of using it for sports and the things that it can do for them. But I like to really help people recognize, what is it like to be in a body and work with your body to create in your world. I think we're way more powerful when we're united, body, mind, and soul, than if we're just trying to function from one or maybe the other two legs of the tripod.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up, because what's interesting about this platform, it originally was supposed to be a different platform, because being a plastic and reconstructive and regenerative surgeon for the last 20 years, I'm doing a lot with beauty. And it's transformed and transmuted into internal beauty as well as the external one. So that's why I become a coach and work with wellness and physiology and all these things. But what I found over the years is that, and oftentimes I still, as a plastic surgeon, patients come up to me and they're worried. They're worried about plastic surgery because they're thinking, is this too vain? And it's unfortunate that this is just such a big stigma with so many people that can work against them. Even when you think you're beautiful, then other people will criticize you. Or if you are beautiful and you don't think you are, or if by any standard you're not beautiful and you're still, in a bad space, no matter what. And so, how do you really encompass, how do you go about understanding or making that shift for people to have a different perspective?
Right. Well, I do think that that's another thing that our culture has done. And I like to tell people that every body type and every size has been the preferred body at some time in history or some place in the world.
Yes.
You look at the portraits that Rubens did, and by today's standards, those women are considered enormous and perhaps not as attractive. In Samoa, I'm probably too skinny to be marriage worthy, right? And so what I try to encourage people to do is to stop measuring yourself against a yardstick where you're failing. And recognize, as you said, and I'm all for, if having plastic surgery is fun for you and you will feel better about yourself, wonderful. But if you think that you're not valid or worthy of love and desire until you do that, getting the surgery done may not fix the issue, because people can only love us as much as we love ourselves, as you've said. So it's an inside job about feeling beautiful and worthy just the way you are. And the other stuff is an enhancement because it's fun.
Right. And that's exactly what it needs to be. It's just an enhancement. It's finding that opportunity, whatever it is, however you do it, whether it is through surgery or it's through makeup or it's your haircut. I spend a lot of money on my haircut because it's important to me, because it allows me to feel better about myself, and that's a good thing. And what was fascinating, and you probably are very familiar with this, I guess that the soap company Dove, they hired a forensic artist, and that one where they had this commercial where they had women describe to this forensic artist, how they saw themselves. And then they had independent women describe that same person. And what was fascinating is that when the women portrayed themselves compared to the other people seeing them, what the other people saw was dramatically different, dramatically more beautiful, in fact, and kind. And so it's interesting how we get affected by our own self-perception. So when we talk about that joyful relationship, right? How do you coach your people with that? What is that part, that you do so that they begin to understand that it's okay to have a great relationship with yourself?
Yeah, well, it's really about being willing to release judgment and look at yourself with eyes of love. And so there's a bunch of different exercises that I would encourage people to do. One of them is to touch yourself from head to toe every day. Not just because you're putting on moisturizer really quick, run out of the house, but to actually be present to this amazing vehicle that we have. I tell my body, thank you every day. Thank you for carrying me around. Thank you for helping me be a presence in the world. Thank you for allowing me to taste delicious food, right? Because I'm a spiritual being, but spiritual beings can't taste, touch, smell. They can't enjoy the five senses. So that's part of it, being grateful for your body and then being willing to be in your five senses in the here and now. A lot of what we do when we're relating with other people sensually or sexually is that we go up here into our fantasy world. And instead, I really coach people to be present. What does it feel like when I gaze into your eyes? What is it like when my hand strokes your cheek or strokes my own? What am I present to? What sensations am I aware of in my body? So all of those things are beginning to build a relationship, let alone a joyful one, but just getting into a relationship with your body. And then the joy comes from being willing to look in the mirror and see how gorgeous you are, just the way you are.
My coach actually taught me a great strategy, and I actually have my own mirror, on my desk. And so I'm looking at myself all the time. It's the coolest thing. But what I find interesting too, and you mentioned, look into somebody's eyes, how difficult it is for so many people to actually look, because they've learned not to look, to talk kind of rule. And, and it's almost like that self-judgment, and they're thinking, okay, what is that person thinking about me? And it's that lack of acceptance of how you look. I think the key distinction, at least for me, which is relevant, and that's why I'm sometimes concerned as to how people are promoting things or allowing certain body types to be that the way they are, when in fact they actually are unhealthy. There's a difference between when you have a healthy figure, and I mean by that when your body and physiology is fine and you're big,
Mm-hmm.
small, or skinny or whatever, versus just saying, okay, it's okay to be really overweight, because it's not. And so,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, in this day and age, there's so many mixed messages, and that people don't have the wherewithal, if you will, to understand the importance of their own personal health. And so I think the first step is the one that you mentioned, is that being able to touch yourself. And automatically people think, oh, well, I'm touching, the private parts. No, we're talking about your entire body, where
Mm-hmm.
you're being present, right? And you're getting a full experience of life, because it's so easy to shut down. It's so easy to get that cell phone out here and be focused on here and not pay attention, to your own body. And one of the key things, I think, and I'm so glad you brought this up, is that for our own personal health, we need to be in touch with our body.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because what I was thinking about is that a lot of us are walking around in what they call skin hunger, longing to be touched. And the body needs nurturing touch. It releases endorphins. It releases hormones that aid
Mm-hmm.
us in our sense of well-being and peace, right? There have been so many studies done with children who are not touched, people that are babies that had to grow up in incubators, and they've changed how they do that now so that the parents can touch the child. And so it's very important that we get touched. But often, if we don't build a habit of being present to being touched by ourselves first, someone else could come up and touch us and we don't even feel it. It's like we're not getting nourished because we can't digest what's being given to us in the moment. So there's a piece about being willing to build that muscle of being present to the pleasure that your body has. And the very first thing that will come up, and I often encourage my clients, this is a big piece, is being willing to look at what messages you did get about your body, about your sexuality, right? And being willing to look at those and just go, oh, isn't that interesting? That is an interesting point of view that I got. Bodies are bad. Sex is dirty. Men are animals. Nice girls don't enjoy sex. I could go on. But being willing to look at what you were given and question whether that's really working for you in creating the life and the connection with other people that you want to have.
So I'm curious, because it kind of goes back to my original question. Where does all that come from? Where do all those, what's the origin, the fundamental origin of all those misconceptions, where, men are bad or sex is dirty or all these things? I mean, where does it actually stem from? Do you have a clue?
I think that it's inherited, and it also becomes part of the culture. These things get handed down. Certainly religions have had a vested interest, particularly, the Judeo-Christian tradition came in and wanted to separate people from the religions that had preceded it. And those religions were, in general, more embodied and more comfortable with sexuality. And so one of the things that happened is the Judeo-Christian mindset was no sex. Sex is bad. Sex only happens within marriage. It was a way of controlling people. In fact, handing down judgments, I believe, are a way of keeping people out of their own power. If we had an entire populace, see, this is my mission. This is my platform, to create a world of lit up, turned on, enthusiastic people who are in love with themselves and in love with their life. Because I really believe, the name of my company is Pleasure Evolution, that if we follow what lights us up, if we free ourselves from those negative judgments, we actually become more powerful, not just in the bedroom, but everywhere in our lives.
And it's my belief, I guess, as that I'm creating right now as we're talking almost, is that when people are indeed much more comfortable with their own body, when they actually have a healthy relationship with themselves, whatever that is for each individual, then you're not going to have all these challenging situations, challenging encounters with others, so that, we don't have to be so protective. And in this day and age, I go to these interesting events, and one interesting event is called Burning Man. And, now there's these claims, look, you have to have consent because they're being so protective. And I think if you're not in that space of a healthy relationship, then it's likely that you may not behave in a sensible and honorable way. And unfortunately today we have to be so protective. And, we see that, even in politics, and not that this is a political forum. However, people are shunned for just being really nice.
Yeah. There's definitely, that's an interesting point of view too, that you have to be cutthroat to get ahead, that nice people get walked on. For sure. Being willing to look at these things, I wanted to cycle back to what you said about people being overweight and unhealthy. And often when we are engaging in behaviors that aren't healthy for us, emotionally or physically, it's because we're more committed to something else.
Right.
And it's usually something we're not even aware of. So when someone is drastically overweight, I'm really interested to know, what does food mean to you? Did you grow up in one of those families where food is love? And so now, are you using food to self-soothe, to self-medicate? Are you keeping people away? That's very common, particularly it's just very common that people will develop weight as a way of not being attractive because it makes them feel safer. Actually, if they don't feel safe receiving other people's attraction to them, they may put on weight so that they push people away. People who gain, we didn't talk about my background, but I studied at a 4-year school to become an energy healer. And so we talked a lot about how the body is shaped by what we believe. And a lot of where we sense other people's feelings about us is in our solar plexus. And when people are too aware of other people, or when you grow up in a household where maybe there's a lot of anger present, there's a tendency to put weight on in the belly to not feel that, to not be aware. It's almost like a layer of protection. And if we don't look at that, and if we're not willing to say, wow, do I really want to choose this anymore? See, that's it. We have choice. It's all choice. And when we're willing to look at why we're doing any kind of behavior, we can choose in today whether it works for us anymore. And that's what a coach will do, is help you examine. That's what your beliefs that no longer, they had a purpose in your childhood, they don't work anymore. Now you want a partner. Now you want to be loved. You don't want to have your walls up physically and emotionally. How do you bring them down? So.
It's interesting what you're saying, because it's clear that we are social beings. That's how we do survive and thrive in this world. And we yearn so much for that. And at the same time, we're so closed off to that as well. And it really comes down to, as you mentioned earlier, to all this, self-judgment, self-criticism. So how do you actually go about helping people release that judgment and release that criticism? Because I'm sure, again, as you said, we do that, we overeat just to feel safe because we're also so self-critical. So what are some of the strategies or steps that you use to help people, not feel so judgmental of self and critical, and therefore of others?
That's a great question, and there are a bunch of different modalities that I'll use with clients. But the main strategy is to give yourself a little bit of space when you notice a belief or a limiting statement in your life, beginning to question whether it's really truth with a capital T, and just begin to contemplate, what if the opposite is true? So you need to reprogram. You need to put new data in. If the voice says you're too fat to be lovable, you can try on, I'm too skinny to be lovable. I'm just fat enough to be lovable. I'm not fat enough to be lovable. And I know it seems kind of laughable, but it really begins to shake loose. Like, what if the opposite were true? Is this really truth, or is this just something that someone else said? I mean, I have a mother who's extremely concerned about her weight, and I can only imagine that she was made to feel really concerned about her weight. And so, being willing, I mean, I look back at my younger self when I thought I was overweight. I wish I still had that body. Most of the feelings, thoughts, and emotions that we have are not true. And it's even very likely that they don't belong to us. I'm a practitioner in something called access consciousness, where we're taught to question every thought we have, whether it really belongs to us or we are just empathing everything that's been kind of sold to us, as the right way to be. Marilyn Monroe, for God's sake, was a size 14. And she was, the icon of her day. And then we got Twiggy.
Right. And
right.
She still is, and I don't think people realize that she was a 14. I'm curious about this access consciousness. Tell us a little bit about that, and how does that work? And because you're absolutely right, and I have a term. We're all victims of misconceptions of the stuff that's been fed to us when we were young, and we did not have the maturity or the ability to differentiate what was real and what wasn't. But out of fear of not surviving, right, then we incorporated these misconceptions. So how do you go about helping people with this access consciousness? Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so access consciousness is a set of tools and techniques to empower people to know what they know. And it was discovered, started about 18 to 20 years ago by a guy named Gary Douglas, and they have facilitators worldwide. And the number one technique that I learned from them is an energy technique called access bars, where I lay my hands on a person's head, stimulating 32 different points that correspond to different areas of your life. It has the effect of allowing the brain to catch itself in this sort of redundant, repetitive thought. And if it's not serving you anymore, it lifts it out. It just lets it go. Another one of their tools is to question, who does this thought belong to? And did I just inherit this? If it's not mine, I'm going to give it back. I'm going to return it to wherever it came from, because today I'm choosing not to believe it anymore. And if it,
I want to add before you continue, because I want to hear more, but I just want to qualify what you just said. And, I can only imagine a lot of people say, well, that sounds silly. And the truth is that, we can also be playful with ourselves. Where that, as children, if we can just allow that child to come out again, because they don't want to be all they want to be, regardless of what anybody else is saying, until the parents really crush them or other people crush them or stun them. But if you go back to that being playfulness, it actually engages a lot more neurons in your head, and therefore it allows that process to be nicely released. Because you're absolutely right. Because if you're not happy, this is what I tell my clients, if you're not happy with your life right now, make another decision, change it, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what you're saying. If there's something that's holding you back and you don't like, change it. And here's an interesting way, just as you described, as how you can do that. So please continue.
Yeah, well, I really believe that finding these underlying commitments, these secret agendas, it can be really helpful. Like if you're not happy with some part of your life and you're finding it difficult to make the choice or make the change, then why aren't you? Rather than judging yourself for not another judgment, right? You're not willing to change, therefore you're a loser. Well, no, sometimes we're not willing to make the change because we like being heavy because it protects us. We like being broke because we don't have to worry about other people being jealous or asking us for money, right? You know, so one side of you is going, I'd really like to fix my financial situation. I'd like more money. And yet somehow you can never get there. It's because part of you doesn't want more money. And you have to be willing to look at that voice and figure out what it wants instead.
And
So,
just on that comment as an example, and I think what happens is that we create a certain anchor, you know, with a situation. And what I mean more specifically of this, let's say somebody says unconsciously doesn't want to be, you know, rich or wealthy, because as you said, that would mean that they would lose out, you know, particular relationships. And that's all running in the unconscious mind. And when for whatever reason and at a young age we associate that with safety and certainty and love, then we're holding on to that, and by the life of us we can't figure out why things aren't working. And I'll give you one example of mine, because I've done also a lot of work in energy healing. And I think I mentioned to you that I worked or went to school to one of the sister schools of Barbara Brennan's in Miami, out in New Mexico. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And what they do, and I'm sure you had the same schooling, is you do experientials. And what I found through these experientials is that you kind of go back to when you were young, maybe you're 3 months old, or maybe you're a year old, things that you don't actively remember, and kind of imagine yourself in that space. And I did that with an interesting problem that I used to have. I don't have this anymore. And that is that I would go to the store, say Publix, a food store, a supermarket, buy all these wonderful, healthy food. And then I'd bring it all home, probably bought way too much, and then I wouldn't do anything with it. And by the life of me, I couldn't figure out what was preventing me. And I realized I kind of went back in this little story train of mine, and I came up with an idea. And I don't know if it's true or not. I didn't get a chance to ask my brothers or my parents. But I think when I was maybe 1 or 2 years old, I kind of raided the fridge, brought all the fruits and vegetables because I was so excited because I saw everybody else eating all these things. And I thought, that's a good thing for a 1-year-old. And then I think I changed. And I was embarrassed. And so that carries on. And so our experiences, the decisions that we made unconsciously because of whatever experience we had when we were young, carry through to us today. And so you're spot on when you have people relate to that and sometimes just decide, I'm going to let it go.
Right. Yeah, it can be that easy. Or you can also, you know, I like to embody some of the letting go process. There are guided meditations. You can write down the messages you receive that are running you, that are no longer serving you, and burn them. You can tear them up and scatter them to the wind. You can I've written things on graham crackers and thrown them in the river. That's a nice one that doesn't make pollution. It also feeds the ducks. But there's something, because this is about a joyful relationship to your body. Right? So it's one thing to do it in your head. It's one thing to try to think yourself out of these thoughts. It's another to actually do something that shifts you in your body. And so that's why I like to actually take an action that physically moves the energy out of you in some way. And to get your spirit involved would be to do it in a meditative way. I do a guided meditation with people where I envision them with a bag full of rocks. And each one of these rocks is something negative that someone told them. And one by one, taking the rocks, visualizing themselves taking the rocks out. Because our bodies also hold this stuff. You know, think what happens to you when the boss comes and says, I need to see you in my office.
All the time.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We start to sweat, eyes dilate a little, butterflies in the stomach, blood pressure, heart fluttering. Well, all of that is creating a response in your body. And now anytime anything happens that's similar to that I need to speak to you feeling, where you're worried that you've gotten into trouble, your body goes into automatic pilot. And so we also want to work not just with our thoughts, but also with the places in our body that are holding that, in the muscles, in the tissues, where our switch gets tripped and we just begin to respond as if we were in that situation. And then it goes back even further. The boss says that, but when your mother said, I need to see you, young man, and just wait till your father gets home, right? Mm-hmm. So we just go back and back to the first time that all of that automatic pilot, oh my God, I've done something wrong, I'm a horrible person, all of that stuff gets lodged in us. And we just keep skimming off the top until we get to the beautiful light that's underneath, and power that we all have as our birthright.
My mom could never use that statement, wait till your dad comes home, because he traveled so much. So she just had to give me a look, and that's a look that I began using with my own kids. I have 3 of them. And what's interesting is that I really was very mindful of the language that I adopted later on when there are, young teens, because that's exactly what happens. I got to talk to you. And then they would freak out and they realize, well, hang on a second, that's not a fun energy. And so I really modified that so that they never had to worry about any of that. But I have a question for you, because I think the meditation is a key point, and that's, I think, where I began a lot of my transformation is, meditating, with mantras specifically. And actually the first one that I was using was no judgment. And I would just repeat it, hundreds of times over and over again. And so, but I'm curious, with your meditations, do you actually recommend physical activity with that to even better incorporate that in their bodies and even work it out with specific mantras? Is that something that might help?
I have to be honest, I haven't done physical activity while meditating. I have done different kinds of meditation that involve breath. I've done process work, which something called core energetics is a form of therapy that actually involves your body. You might work through anger by hitting a punching bag or smacking a cube with a tennis racket. And that, I think, is amazing work if you can find someone that does that, because you do get to move it through your body. And a lot of emotion is just energy that we are keeping from moving. It gets stuck in us and it comes out as anger, sadness, grief, but gets stuck in the body. But when we're willing to move it with our body, it can be released and we don't have to hold on to it and have it seep out sideways.
So I want to go back to, the name of your company, Pleasure Evolution. I love that concept. And so here's my question, because it seems that for many, it's not good to have pleasure. Whether it's just eating nice food, whether it's hugging somebody else, or any kind of pleasure. Again, background on that?
Well, pleasure is suspect in this culture. The whole story of the ant and the grasshopper, right? That, I think what's happened is, as we became an industrial culture, pleasure seemed like a distraction. If the workers were having too much fun, they wouldn't do the work. So it kind of got handed down to us that we needed to work, and we just have become a culture that works all the time. So if you will bear with me, I would like to really just invite our watchers and our listeners, because we're up in our heads, let's just take a moment to take a couple of deep breaths, all of us together, and get into our bodies as we're assimilating all this information. So I like to recommend you breathe in through your nose, all the way down to your belly, and let it out through your mouth. And another deep breath in through the nose. Allow your body to stretch if it wants to. It might. And then let it out. And on this next one, be willing to let a little sound come out. So breathing in through your nose. And let sound on the out breath. Yeah. So there's an awareness, just becoming aware of what's happening with our body. And willing to allow ourselves to have pleasure. How do we do that? Well, some of it is that we get around other people who are willing to allow pleasure, giving ourselves permission to enjoy pleasure and to know and trust that we know when it's time to stop.
And again, that's a key point. And being able to say no, being able to say, these are my boundaries, and not have the fear that you're going to be crucified or rejected or anything else. And I think that's the key point. Again, we all have to be responsible for ourselves. And it does begin with your own body. And you see me kind of rocking here because I have one of these things, these chairs, these like, I don't like
a ball.
No, it's one of those. Well, it's got like a curved bottom to it, and so again, it allows me to be connected with the body. And you're absolutely right, because the foundation of everything that we are, our entire existence, and then purpose in life is having that connection, and just having that place where you can say, yeah, I'm enjoying this. I like enjoying it. I mean, why have a life where you can't be enjoying things? And it's not just the physical. I mean, it's everything. And giving yourself that permission to have pleasure, because the truth is that is also a very generative energy. It's a healing energy. And the truth is, I think most people are happy or happier when they're around people that are also happy.
Right. Well, and, I think you really hit the nail on the head that actually to embrace pleasure takes courage. I think it takes a lot of courage, because it's much easier to bond over what's wrong and what's painful. And I blame it on Queen for a Day. It was a TV show, for those of you who are too young, in about the 50s in America, where women would come on and talk about how bad their life was. And the woman with the worst sob story won an apartment full of appliances.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the beginning of our rewarding the sob story. And so it became our culture, and Monty Python did a brilliant skit about it too once, where, one guy would say, well, I had a horrible day at work. And the other one said, oh yeah, well, my boss beats me. And then the other one says, at least you have a job. And the other one says, well, yeah. And they just keep going down and down. And if you think about it, when you're riding a bike, you want to go up, you got to work, you got to pedal up the hill to where the pleasure is, the top of the mountain. That's where all the goodies, that's where the good view is. It's really easy to coast down to the bottom of the pile. And so it does take a deliberate focus, and that's another place where we have to kind of train ourselves. When you notice yourself telling your sob story and casting everything in the worst possible light, flick yourself and see where you can find a way to turn that around. What's right about this that I'm not getting? It's one of my magical gifts. My dad used to say that I could walk into a room full of poop and I would start digging until I found the pony. I really believe that there's a gift everywhere. And even in those most difficult times in my life, this has really carried me through to recognize that at some point I'm going to look back and recognize there was a gift in there. And so I have trained myself to look at what's right about everything and to always speak as in the most positive way that I can, and to really celebrate what's good in my life and risk that other people are going to be jealous and other people are going to think I'm arrogant and other people may think I'm fake, but I'm having a good time. So you can think what you like over there. I'm willing to risk that today.
I love it. So what was that show again? Because I got to check it out.
Queen for a Day.
Queen for a Day. Oh my gosh. What a concept. Everything is a choice. And I love what the work that we do is we actually give people more choices. And even if it's through this, platform, this show where people have new ideas and perhaps new permissions. I mean, I always talk about give yourself permission to be human. And that's an interesting story for another day. But here's what's interesting, and what I've discovered is that talking about how bad life is actually the normal social currency these days. And that's the easiest form of how people do connect. Because the
Yeah.
truth is that if you are telling somebody, you know what, I had an amazing day today, and I just got a raise, and I won the lottery, and now I bought this new, I had 5 new cars, and I had the greatest night with my spouse last night, and now I'm going on holiday for the rest of the year. And then people are going to say, nah, get away from me, right? But then, right, if you says, I had the worst night in my life, and just lost my job, and now I can't, live in my house anymore, and then, and then people just will, come to you and try to soothe you, and so you're spot on that, and so we'll have to, blame, Hollywood or whatever for putting up this show, because
Right.
here's what's interesting, and again, this is a data point that I always like to use. What's wrong is always available to you, and so is what's right.
Right.
It's a choice. Pain is inevitable, but suffering isn't. Suffering is also a
Right.
choice. But another one that I want to share with you, and I like what you said, because it's also a choice to always look for where the pony is. It's always a choice to find the good in everything. And sometimes a tool that we can use, and I just learned this the other day, is have a cookie jar of all the wonderful memories and experiences and accomplishments that you have, and just remember, hey, you know what? I can take a cookie out of this because I did something really great at some point in my life. And so you're doing that naturally, and that's what we can all ascribe, to go forward to. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so what else do you help? How else do you help people to get into that pleasure place? Because that's what your passion is. That's the evolution. And if we could all have more pleasure, I think we'd be a lot nicer to each other.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad you asked that, because I really would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about sex, because that is my passion. And the reason, well, is it my passion? It's one of my greatest gifts, to be a space of acceptance for people, however their sexuality and their erotic being presents. And the reason that I am in that space, that I have become that space, is because it was my personal journey. I had some traumatizing things happen to me in my childhood, and I was disconnected from my own body. And I went to healing school, and I was working on infertility and bad backs and cancer and emotional disturbance. And one of the teachers that was working with me pointed out that she saw that I had a tremendous amount of sexual energy, that she actually called me a sacred prostitute. And I was like, whoa, what does that mean?
Right.
And at the time I was in a marriage and I had a child, and I was not fulfilled in the bedroom. I found myself one night in the middle of making love thinking, are you done yet? And that had nothing to do with his skill. It had to do with the fact that, like we talked about at the very beginning of the program, I was all up in my head. I wasn't in my body enjoying the connection that is possible in a sexual act with another human being. And that began a journey for me of learning to connect to myself, of letting go of limiting feelings that I had, and giving myself permission to be aroused by what I was aroused by. And then I had a client have an orgasm on the table. And what I recognize is that the energy that is moving through us when we do healing, it feels the same as a really good orgasm.
Right.
And I heard in my head, sexual arousal is the body's joy at feeling itself. This is life force, and we've somehow put it in this box as if it can only be accessed in a sexual act that looks like one man and one woman and part A and part B, or maybe we've gotten more broad-minded, so now it's a man and a man or a woman and a woman. But there's a lot of ways that we've defined how we can access that energy. And my mission is to help people have access to that energy whenever they want it, so we can draw it from all kinds of places, and to give ourselves permission to have more of it when we're in actual situations with other people. Oh, now I'm really excited. So just cut me. I could just keep talking. But, if there's a place in your bedroom life where you're not feeling fully fulfilled, it is possible for you to find your voice, figure out what your body wants that's different, and ask for it and create it.
So one of the things I think it's so challenging in this day and age is particularly one's own sexuality and one's own experience within that realm, because so much is taboo and so much is wrong and so much is criticized, and there's this intense fear of rejection. Like, well, if I like this, then I must be a bad person. And so my sense is that if people were much more free and with courage to be able to express how they are, and if they are rejected, okay, that's life. But wouldn't you rather be with someone who doesn't reject you, who accepts you, who you are, and what you're thinking, regardless of what your sexual tint is or preference? Because then that becomes a much more honest relationship with other people. And so
absolutely,
I think that the biggest problem is because, number one, it's not talked about. Number two, if it is talked about, it's not good, it's bad. And so how do people go about going on that path of discovery or journey? I mean, yes, there's someone like you out there. First of all, I do want to know how people can find you, but just in general, I mean, what do you recommend for people to start looking into or exploring? I mean, are there coaches out there, are there books out there, what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I recommend my totally free ebook, which is available to everyone who's listening at my website, pleasureevolution.com. It's called The Sexual Authenticity Handbook. Own your pleasure, find your power. And it's a 5-step system for how you can begin to break out of that box and begin to find what fulfills you. And there are lots of suggestions in there. And one of the ways that I started was that I would go into sex toy stores. And now we don't even have to go into a store. You can just go on the internet and just look at, sorry, my door just swang open. The ghosts have come in to hear this conversation. I would go to sex toy stores and I would look at all the stuff. I wouldn't buy anything, and I'd be kind of peeking through my fingers. Right. But it just broadened my horizons. That was step one. So now you can go on the internet and you can begin to do a little research. What turns you on? What creates some feelings in you, some excitement? And often what shuts people down from that is the thought that if they let themselves know it turns them on, then the next thing they're going to do is go do it, and it's going to ruin everything. And I want to say that there's a big difference between just allow yourself to know what turns you on, and know that conceptual thought is very potent. You never have to act on that behavior. It's just enough to allow yourself to think about it. That can be the starting place. So for example, in a couple, one person may suddenly discover that there's something they would like to try. And you can tell your partner, I just noticed that there's this thing that I want to try. And the other partner can say, cool, I'd like to hear about it. I might not want to try it with you, but I'm willing to hear what it is without judging you for it. And then you can kind of negotiate what that might look like if you wanted to try it on, a new behavior in your bedroom.
I think a key aspect of successful relationships, besides the fact that communication is key, and we haven't really quite learned how to communicate. And again, there's so many ways that we do communicate, even physically with touch, that we're not even familiar with or don't even allow. But I think an interesting thing for people to appreciate in lieu of what you just shared, and when you see these incredibly happy couples that have been married forever, it's like, how's this even possible? nowadays, for sure. And the story that I've heard before is, the couples, they always try something once. And if they both like it, great. And if they don't like it, then they don't do that again. And
Yeah.
again, it includes a conversation, a honest, undefended, and you're very familiar with the word undefended. The undefended conversation that without judgment says, you know what, I really don't like this. And then, maybe that will change over time. But just allowing that place to be there and not to have the fear or the experience of rejection. And recognizing when rejection does happen, that, and again, what you do is help people with different languages, or just, what's really true about this? What if it isn't rejection? What if it's actually something else? What if they're just freaked out, scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
So asking the question, what's really true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I teach this in my classes and talk about it. And you've mentioned rejection a few times, and the fear of rejection can be a potent block. And I like to tell people that rejection isn't a rejection of you. See, we're afraid to make a request because we think that if they don't want to do it, it means there's something wrong with us. But what actually they are turning down your offer or your request, and you can make a new one. And what they've actually done is given you the gift of their truth, which is a very generous thing for them to do. And they're not you don't have to take things personally. And, you can say, wow, this person gave me information about them. They're not a good fit for me. My grandmother used to say, every pot has a lid. You just got to find yours. For every kink that I have ever heard of, there is someone who has the reciprocal end of it and wants to play. Almost everything.
And that's another thing, again, misconceptions about kink and everything else. And what I've, discovered or appreciate is that in that world, there's a lot of respect. And I think that ultimately is a key point in any kind of relationship, is, having that absolute respect for the other person and consideration and presence for where that other person is, and just allowing that person to be themselves too, giving yourself permission to be human, but letting them to be human too, and with their flaws as well. So as we wrap it up, give us some last wisdom words on your pleasure evolution.
Last wisdom words. Pleasure can be healing. Orgasm is actually one of the most nourishing things for your brain. So I'm a big fan. But being willing to discover and embrace what is unique and right for you. There's no one right way to do relationship. There's no one right way to do sex. And finding out what your unique body loves and being willing to find ways to make that a reality for you can just, empower you throughout your whole life. It's going to just make you feel more attractive, magnetic, creative, to bringing everything else about in your life.
And so wise words, that magnetism is that person that's fully engaged with themselves, mind, body, and spirit, and all the aspects. And you know what? That magnetism, that's infectious, and we need more of that. So Rebecca, I really want to thank you for today. I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, Prescription for Your Transformation, Real People, Real Conversations, Real Success, talking about a topic that's very difficult for many to even contemplate thinking about. And the truth is that when we explore that place, then we can become even more magnetic. Rebecca, thank you so much. And I'll be back.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Dr. Rademaker's Prescription for Transformation. Join Dr. Bart Rademaker live right here on Radio Star Worldwide each week. or on demand 24/7.
Rebecca, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks everyone for tuning in.